Do you know what makes me really, really anxious? Birds like swarming over each other and coming at you.
Oh God, you're making me anxious now too. This is movies that shaped our anxieties. This is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, or moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite films. So Alex, you already introduced our topic for the day, which is anxiety. How
hmm
did you think about this episode? And are you an anxious person?
Yeah, so I do not consider myself an anxious person, actually. I consider
Mhm.
myself pretty chill. I mean, passionate about certain things for sure, but
Yes.
overall pretty chill. But there are things that can trigger me, for lack of a better word. And the approach I took to this episode was thinking about the movies that make me feel anxious, which then make me think about, well, then what about this is triggering to me? And then it sort of uncovers the anxieties that I actually have in real life.
Mm.
Because I don't focus on my anxieties much. I don't, again, consider myself an anxious person, but it was these movies, because I felt this way, I realized I actually am anxious about a couple things, and we'll get into that later in the episode. What about you? Do you consider yourself anxious?
Yeah, I don't think consider myself as an anxious person, but kind of similar to you, there are definitely things that from my own life experience over the years, I
Mm-hmm.
know that there's some things that do make me anxious. So for me, thinking about these movies, it was a bit of the opposite, that basically hunting for movies that are thematically tied to the things that I am anxious about
Mm.
in life or
Mm-hmm.
were. Maybe I worked on them or have a
Mm-hmm.
different perspective, but I could link these movies and the themes of these movies with the things that I'm anxious about. I purposely didn't want to pick movies that on surface are just anxious because I could do that. And that to me is almost like a different episode in my mind, that movies that are, most anxiety driving. And there's some of those in here, obviously, but it's less about that, more about the thematic resonance of what the things that make me anxious.
Oh, yeah. Again, for me, it uncovered, like, I don't get anxious often. So when I do, I'm like, why am I anxious at this? And then
Yeah.
that makes me understand what I actually feel anxious about, which some of your movies actually did make me feel very anxious. And I'm like, oh, this is a triggering
Good.
thing. Why is it? So it helped me do some more like self-reflection too. So I don't think your movies are totally like, drinking a nice cup of tea on a Sunday afternoon.
No, they're definitely not. Yeah. But I think I do have a thing with movies that are designed to be anxious or make you anxious.
Mm,
They do make me anxious, but then I also totally forget about them because they are surface
mm.
level to me. And I'm like, oh, this is so engineered. I can see through
Oh, yeah.
what they were trying to do to kind of really ratchet up the anxiety. And that I sort of tune out. I have the opposite response to that in
Well,
a
this
way.
should be a very interesting episode then.
Yeah.
Okay, so to not leave our listeners anxiously waiting, why don't we dive into the list? So, Karan, what is your number three film that shaped your anxieties?
All right. So my number three is a movie called Doubt from 2008, directed by John Patrick Shanley, starring Meryl Streep, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams, and Viola Davis. Stacked cast. Quick logline. A Catholic school principal questions a priest's ambiguous relationship with a troubled young student. So for me, the reason why I put this, and there are many sort of anxiety driving things in this movie in
Mm-hmm.
general, just the subject matter itself, but I can almost kind of put a pin in that of kind of what causes anxiety. But to me, it's more about just not knowing what the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this comes from a place of me wanting to have a sense of control on the information I have and how other people feel, how I feel, who's done what. This has been a childhood thing for me from the very beginning of time since I can remember, when people were being kind of shifty or
Mm.
not being honest. And always I could pick up on that at a very, very young age. And even watching movies with my mom and dad, I would constantly be asking, is this the bad guy? Is this the good guy? Is this the good girl? Like my mom had to stop me that you need to sort of step out of the room because I
Yeah.
really wanted to know like what was right, what was wrong. And this movie is exactly about that, which is sort of the moral, personal, emotional ambiguity of life and people. And the movie sort of really plays with that. But before I get too further, had you watched this movie before? And If not, and if so, how did this land on you from an anxiety standpoint?
Yeah, I'd never seen this film before, and I can get in my thoughts about the film in a bit. It just didn't really work for me, but I think the anxiety piece that definitely resonated was that feeling when you, much like Meryl Streep's character in the film, she knows, quote unquote, that Philip Seymour Hoffman did this thing and is hurting kids essentially.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't have no proof. She just feels that it's right. And I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely been in situations, whether it's work or personal life, where I'm like, I just believe this is definitely this is the truth. And I
Yeah.
feel like I know it. And then when you basically get what you want because of that, there's an immediate set, at least for me, of like, wait, actually, maybe I wasn't so right about that. Like immediately sets in, and that can turn into guilt. And I think definitely
Yeah.
that's where Meryl Streep's character gets to in this film too. She finally does get what she wants. People believe her, and Philip Seymour Hoffman basically has to leave the parish. And then
Mm-hmm.
immediately she's like, oh, wait, actually, I don't know now. Like it's when you suddenly get that validation of everyone saying, okay, fine, your gut is right. I mean, for me personally, I immediately start questioning that. So I could
Yeah.
totally relate to her character in this film where you just have this sense of, I don't know why, but I feel this way. And I'm just going to keep saying that and saying that and saying that no matter what. I have no evidence and it doesn't matter because I just know it.
Yeah.
And then you never,
100%.
maybe you can never, I mean, in this movie leaves it ambiguous too. You don't really
Yeah.
know if he actually is molesting kids or being inappropriate with kids. You have no idea. There is no
Yeah.
evidence presented to you as the viewer.
Yeah.
You just have to trust Meryl Streep, I guess, and her gut.
And your own instinct, right? Like that's why this movie is very interesting to me, is that it doesn't wrap it all up in a neat bow. And throughout the movie, your allegiances are shifting and this is sort of how life is as well. And people can be like that it sort of really pokes at the gray of life and people. Because yeah, on one hand, Philip Seymour Hoffman, you see him, he's sort of joking and sort of a loud mouth. And I love those scenes of the contrast between the sisters and Philip Seymour Hoffman with the bishops, like the eating scenes, like the contrast of those, right? That there they are kind of eating meat and drinking wine and even making fun of other people and other women and such.
Right.
Meanwhile,
Smoking, having a good time.
having a good time. And meanwhile, on the sister side, it's like a very quiet, kind of solitude underlying kind of way of eating food and provocation and such. So it's very interesting that you kind of think that, oh yeah, of course, a person like Philip Seymour Hoffman who lives that kind of life has probably done something bad. But I think to me, the biggest kind of pivotal point in the movie is when Viola Davis, who's the kid's mother, who enters and everything changes essentially. Because by then, the audience has sort of made up their mind. And most of us are on Meryl's side that, okay, there's something fishy here. There's something wrong here. Even though we don't know all the facts, we have no real evidence, but you sort of feel it in your bones. But then she comes in and changes the level, the playing field, where it's not even about did he do it or not. It's more about what actually matters,
right?
For the boy's safety and success, and where does he go from here and such. And there are complications with the father, which is her husband, and such. So there's just a lot of messiness at play, which is what I love about this movie, I think.
The movie's not making a call right or wrong about what to do in these situations. It's leaving a lot up to the audience to decide, well, is that right of Viola Davis to make that trade-off, basically be okay with her son potentially
Also
getting molested, but it's the price is she's willing to pay that, because if this child was moved out of the school, his whole life might be ruined. And you kind of understand, okay, well, maybe I get where her calculations are coming from. And with Meryl too, it's just, I mean, I guess with that, it's more she's so upset, I think, with Philip Seymour Hoffman being more loosey-goosey or trying to be more modern and do new things with his parish, that she doesn't feel like that's the right path to go. So then I sort of assume that that's why she might have been seeing these things in here with him, because she wanted to, because she didn't like him anyway. She was annoyed at him anyway and was like, oh, well, this now for me looks fishy because I didn't like this person to begin with. Facts be damned. I just have a feeling if I don't like this person.
Some people are like that.
They totally are. They definitely are.
You just don't like somebody, so their actions land on you in a totally different way. Although in this scenario, I feel like in addition to her not liking him because he's sort of out there and more modern and friendly and such, I think this particular sin, if you will, of abuse of this nature, I think seems to have like a different meaning for her. And
Mm,
it could be that maybe she's experienced that herself in the past. Maybe
mm,
she's seen this. Maybe she didn't say anything even when she knew that this was going on in a past life. It
right.
seems to kind of bring out something very deep seated inside of her. And then we haven't mentioned Amy Adams's
Mm,
character, who I think is the audience surrogate,
right.
who is sort of learning on the fly what information is being thrown at her. Most people, like Amy Adams' character, are conflict averse. They want things to be fine. They want
Right.
things to be okay. And you see that immediately the moment he says something that which clears the thing up, and she's like, oh, there you go, this was all a misunderstanding, everything is fine, we can go back to life as if nothing happened.
Right.
So, and that to me is so interesting, right? This is how people are. So you get really different points of view. People are trying to poke the issue, whether there's an issue there or not. There are
Hmm.
people who are trying to just avoid the issue entirely. And then there's somebody who's the actual perpetrator who's also playing games. So
Potential perpetrator.
potential
We don't
perpetrator,
know. We still
exactly.
don't
We
know.
don't
Yeah.
know.
Right.
Alleged.
Right. Alleged. That's a better word for it. Yeah.
Which is amazing because I think it's a stand-in for people. It's a stand-in for societies at large,
Hmm.
which is why this thing works to, at least in my mind, on so many different levels. You mentioned that the film didn't kind of work for you.
Yeah. I found it kind of boring. Took a long
Mm.
time to get quote unquote started. It was maybe like 20 or 30 minutes before the plot kind of like really kicked in. And it definitely was a movie that lives or dies by the performances. This was
Oh
a
yeah,
Born Face film. I thought Philip Seymour Hoffman was amazing in
amazing.
this film. An actor I love, and his performance was great. I don't know, something with Meryl for some reason wasn't working for me. It's a
Mm,
little, the hamness was dialed up a little
mm,
bit too much, and the Bronx accent, which
mm.
is crazy because we've talked about in this podcast many times. Even our Meryl episode, folks can go back and listen to it. She is the accent queen. She always
Right.
nails the accents. And this one like went in and out a little bit for me. I didn't, it was
Interesting.
very odd. I didn't think she was kind of nailing the accent, and it felt a little bit too showy of a performance a bit. Like she
Mm,
was trying to, which is also antithetical to what we also mentioned in that episode where she usually kind of lets the other actors have their time in the spotlight and she doesn't try to take center stage. And this one, for some reason, I kind of felt like she was doing that. I don't know.
mm.
It's like her performance, oddly for me, just didn't really work, and that made this movie not really hold up, or not hold up, but overall kind of work together. I think the theme I definitely resonate with me a lot, and all the things you're talking about, the different people in this, or characters representing different aspects of society, different types of people. I could see
Mhm.
all that, but it didn't hold my interest, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Mhm.
Which
Yeah.
was surprising because it's got a lot of acclaim. Like I kind of missed
Yeah.
this at the time. It got a lot of Oscar nominations and buzz and things. And I just didn't get around to it. So it was always a film that was like, okay, one day I definitely want to get back to Doubt.
Mm.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's too built up in my head too. There's always that.
Could be that too. Yeah, I would agree. Her performance is a little bit dialed up. And when I first watched it, I remember sort of feeling that even more. And over time, I've just said this to myself that, oh, maybe that's the point. Because
Yeah.
she's supposed to be this person who is kind of the king or the queen of her castle, and they kind of show that kind of everybody fears her from the very beginning. And maybe so she's supposed to be a little bit larger than life and a little bit more theatrical. The accent part, I don't know because I'm no expert in accents, especially in the Bronx accent. So I have no idea if it's like in and out or no. But from a filmmaking standpoint, I actually give a lot of credit to John Patrick Shanley, who
Hmm.
wrote the play. This was a play first, then it's made into a movie, and
You could
often
tell,
does.
I think.
You
I
can
think you
tell, but
yeah.
I also think what they did with the amazing Howard Shore score,
Hmm.
really opening this up and kind of using metaphors of, street life from the 40s and various metaphors like that are kind of tied to Philip Seymour Hoffman's sermon of, kind of those shots of the pillows being all ripped apart and
Right.
feathers flying all over and such.
Hmm.
I think the movie, as much as it can, even though it's a chamber piece, it's expanded quite elegantly, I think, because you do get a sense of place. You could all be locked into rooms the way this would be on the stage, but even the walk that Viola and Meryl take
Yeah.
outside, like it really matters. Like the wind, the way it's blowing in different places, almost like this kind of moral conscience, kind of knocking at you. That's what the wind is, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. That was my
So,
favorite scene in the film.
yeah, that's the favorite scene. Yeah,
That scene with them. And it's like Viola's, is that her only scene basically too? She's not really in the movie much. I thought
it's
she was
just
going
two
to be in,
scenes,
but
and
like what a
steals
knockout.
it.
This put her on the
Amazing.
map, right? Wasn't this the one
Yep.
that everyone was like, who's this
Yep.
actress? She's got to
Yep.
be the next thing. She was
Yep.
great in this.
She's amazing.
I did like that scene.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a fan of this movie, weirdly enough, even given the subject matter expert. And maybe I should have said this up front. To me, that's the other thing, that a movie that is anxiety driving has, at least for me, has to be personal enough that I actually want to go and see it. Because there's so many movies that are very, very high on the anxiety quotient, but I never want to watch them again.
Yeah.
There's something about this movie and all my movies that I actually do want to go and watch them again, because I learned something about myself, and they push me. And this whole thing around kind of not knowing the truth and being uncomfortable about not having full control is something that I've always wrestled with. And I think this movie really pokes at that, but does it in a way that's entertaining and enjoyable as well, for even though the subject matter is so dark.
Sure. Again, interesting contrast to my list, and not to give a spoiler about what the film is, but the number one film on my list was a movie I saw once and vowed I'd never see again because I couldn't take it, and I had to watch again for this podcast. And I'm actually kind of glad I did. And I think the movie doesn't drive me up the wall as much, but we'll get to that later in the episode. A little bit of a teaser.
Yeah, those movies I just don't watch them, so they mean nothing to me. As I said up front, I tune out. Okay, do you want to share your number 3 movie that shaped your feelings about anxiety?
Sure. And this is the one I've seen the most of my 3. So this is the most accessible one. This is 2002's Punch Drunk Love. So this is directed and written by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Adam Sandler, Emily Watson, Philip Seymour Hoffman, making his second performance this episode so far, or second appearance this episode so far, Louise Guzman. IMDb plot summary: socially frustrated Barry Egan calls a phone sex line to curb his loneliness. Little does he know it will land him in deep trouble and will jeopardize his burgeoning romance with the mysterious Lena. So for me, this movie represents anxiety in 2 ways. One is a sense of social anxiety that is something that I had much earlier in life, high school, early college, of just being around people or being in places where you just feel very, very socially awkward and you don't really know what to say or what to do. And this movie does a great job of capturing that. And then the second thing that does give me anxiety too is that anxiety that comes along with feeling attracted to someone, like that very early on sense when you're first starting dating, or maybe you see someone across the room or you're working with someone and you start to develop those feelings, and how that makes you anxious and also causes, again, more social anxiety, which is something that I feel like I'm not a victim of anymore, or something that I don't deal with, but I definitely did earlier on in life. And this movie always brings me right back to that. So to start, actually, before I get into more of those themes, and is this a movie you'd seen before? And what are your thoughts on Punch Drunk Love?
Yeah, I'd seen this movie before, quite enjoyed it. I don't think I had the stomach for it to fully take it, because I watched it pretty early in my kind of, film loving phase, if you will. And unlike a lot of PTA movies, I think this movie has a lot of silence and sparseness, but then it sort of ratchets up, slowly and slowly. So it needed, I think I had needed to evolve in my film loving journey, if you will, to kind of fully come to this movie. But it was really great to watch it again, because I had not seen it since. And I guess say I'm unofficially a PTA head, as you've told me through this podcast, even though I don't prescribe to any group or cult of any kind of fandom. So that I have an aversion to that, but I do love everything he's made. There's no question. Like, he's one of our most talented filmmakers ever. So this movie is amazing. I think the color palette, the sound design, and kind of being in the mind of the person, in which case, this case is Adam Sandler. You're literally in his mind. The entire movie, for the most part, is from his point of view.
Oh, yeah.
To the point that, that feeling of social anxiety is sort of manifested physically in this movie through sound and spaces and color and such. And it's definitely an uncomfortable place to be in. Like, for me, falling in love with somebody, or, feeling those feelings, like you said, it's an anxious thing, but it's mostly a happy, anxious, giddy thing, as opposed to the other way around. So it does grate at me, because I mean, that's the point. It's supposed to make you very uncomfortable, but it's also brilliant because you have Adam Sandler, who's probably one of the most lovable people you can put on screen. So I think it's great casting, because if this person was a different actor, I think the physical manifestation of anxiety and their own persona could probably get too much. And I think he doesn't lose that balance, PTA.
No,
You're
definitely
still
not.
rooting for Adam Sandler, and you want to be in this space, even though it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. To get more into my thoughts on the film, I'll start with them with Sandler. So he's an actor who in the 90s was huge for his comedies. I was not at all a fan. Did not like him as a comedian in any way. Still don't to this day like any of his comedy movies. And this movie, when P.T. Anderson actually wrote it for him and went to him and said, I wrote a movie for you. I want you to be in this part. He was at first like afraid, didn't want to do it, and then did. And I remember at the time when this came out, because I saw this in the theaters, being like, oh great, I have to see an Adam Sandler movie now because he's in a P.T. Anderson film. Like, this is weird. Like, he can't pull off drama. Like, what is this? Like, this isn't gonna work. And just being blown away by his performance. And then he is able to capture that, like, incredibly anxious, wound up, socially awkward, very odd, which are all things that were in his comedic performances too, like a Waterboy or Happy Gilmore, Billy Madison. They're all elements of this wound up, anxious character, but with played up more of the comedy. And in this film, it definitely plays up a lot more of that social awkwardness. And to me, it's like I go right back to, he's sort of like the embodiment of my anxieties, Adam Sandler can be. And it works so well. I mean, again, getting to the social anxiety piece, there's a scene, he has all these sisters who always are ragging on him his entire life. And he goes over to one of their houses early on, and he's sort of like standing at the door. He goes in, he comes back out, he goes in again. He's like afraid to kind of get into the house. And, again, I've definitely been there where it's like you go to a party, you don't really know many people. You don't really want to be there, but you feel like you're trying to force yourself. And it's like, oh, I don't know. And then when you get in there, it's just like all this stuff happening, and they're throwing him questions, asking him this. Everyone's talking over one another, sort of like an Altman film, but sort of a horror version of it. And I just get, again, that social anxiety feel. I just got to get out of the room. And he does walk out of the room and just sort of is in the other room, just like, I can't even get in there because of all these people and stuff. And that is, again, when I felt issues of social anxiety back when I was much younger, these were all things that I definitely felt and could relate to, though not to the extreme where he then kicks like a glass door because he's so wound up. I never got like violent or anything like that, but I can relate to sort of that being so wound up because you're just around all these people that just cause you anxiety. And, like you mentioned earlier too, like the John Bryan score is this weird sort of like melodic, but doesn't really have much of a form or structure to it. And that all adds also to this
little off.
It's a little off, right? That whole adds to this whole mise en scène that PTA is creating in this film. And it just works so brilliantly that it just ratchets all that up in all those scenes with his sisters, which is definitely, every time again I watch it, I'm like, oh my God, like I would just get out of this room, Barry, just get out of this room.
Yeah, the sisters are great, and also it's amazing how alike they all look, and the casting is so brilliant. I'm stating the obvious. The other thing is about this movie is the magical love, if you will, which it's almost sort of hard to wrap your head around, because I'm not even sure if that's real or is that Barry's imagination. And the way it's presented is just so interesting that it takes you, grabs you, but is also magical, is also anxiety inducing. It's just kind of an indescribable thing, which is sort of what love can be. So again, it's like a physical manifestation of love in a person.
Right. But I almost feel like it's love that he's either never felt before or is uncomfortable with, because clearly he didn't get love from his sisters. They were ragging on him his whole life, right? So he's having love and having feelings towards Emily Watson makes him anxious because he doesn't know what to do, and he's awkward around her, and she's a little awkward around him, and they have a very strange sort of courtship process, which again, I'm like, okay, that is sort of what dating can be like. Yes, it can be magical and the anxiousness feels like butterflies, but sometimes, at least for me, it can feel like sort of knots in your stomach, like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like, what if I say the wrong thing? And what's going on? And I think another use of music in this film is just this brilliant song that's actually from Altman's Popeye that they use in this track that Shelley Duvall sings about He Needs Me. And it's really weird. And Shelley Duvall's kind of weird sort of anyway. And the vocals are kind of odd. It's like, that's the love theme, quote unquote, of this film. And I think it does capture the awkwardness of love or attraction. That is, again, something that definitely I can relate to in terms of dating anxiety there.
Yeah, no, pretty amazing. Of course, this is a PTA film.
It's great.
Nobody else can pull this off, I think.
No, it's actually in my top 3 favorite films of his. Like, I come back to this a lot I mean, yes, it's also short. It's like 90 minutes. This is back in
Right.
the day where he would be making like Boogie Nights and Magnolia that are like this big, long, sort of dramatic epics. And this at the time was just a very surprising film that he's adding to his filmography at this time that people were shocked and didn't know really what to make of this. But I think it's aged very well over time. And I loved it when I first saw it in theaters. I'm like, oh my God, like, do I like Adam Sandler now? This is odd. It's a movie again that I come back to a lot. And just the use of color, like you said, is just fantastic. Philip Seymour Hoffman also barely in the
Oh,
movie, but that one scene where he's like yelling at him on the
yeah,
phone is just
amazing.
such a great piece of acting. Just an incredible actor.
Amazing. Nobody, I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman is amazing in general, but I think when it comes to like yelling acting to the point where the voice is not even coming from his stomach, it's coming from somewhere even lower.
Yeah.
Your face is red and it's sort of vibrating. Like your entire being is being hurled at another person. Like that's what he does. And we just talked about doubt. There's so many of scenes in that movie as well. Like you want to leave the room if that
Right.
were happening to you, for sure.
Oh yeah, just an incredible performance. And another thing that I just thought was always interesting about this movie was one of the inspirations for PTA to even write it, other than Adam Sandler wanting to make a movie with him, was that whole pudding subplot
Oh yeah.
is a real thing. Someone actually did that, which I think is like so crazy.
Wow.
Like in the late 90s, someone figured the same thing out that Barry Egan does. And for folks who haven't seen the film, there was some contest or sweepstakes where if you bought Healthy Choice, you could redeem them, Healthy Choice products at the grocery store, you could redeem them for airline miles. And he did all this math to realize if he bought these pudding packs, he could be buying like 1 million airline miles at like 90% discount. So someone did this, and it's not even like probably even like the B plot of this movie. It's like the C plot, but I always found that so interesting. And then when I realized, I read later online a couple years after the movie came out, like, did someone actually did this? That's so crazy. Like you could build a movie just around that. That could have been the A plot of the movie, someone doing this. I just love how PTA was inspired by this real life thing and woven it in here in a way that makes sense, of him obsessing over these coupons in the same way that he's obsessing over all these different things in his life, causing him anxiety, but just that it's not even the A or B plot.
It's amazing. But see, that's the kind of thing PTA would do, as opposed to go and make dumb money or all the billion movies about like failed businesses or weird, Ponzi schemes, because they're shallow. And that's not the point. The point is actually the real lives of people, which is then intersected with like these oddities of, companies going up and down or Ponzi schemes being flared up or what have you. And he can see that.
Yeah, no, he's brilliant. And I don't know if you've gotten lost on the internet about the Superman themes in this movie, if you've heard those theories. Yeah, that this movie is a story about Superman. Barry Egan is in the film wearing a blue suit the whole time. He demonstrates super strength by breaking the glass. There's even a scene where he can break a plunger. This business is like fake plungers, where he's breaking the plunger, but no one else can, because he has superhuman strength. And there's a scene at the end of the movie when Emily Watson is in this red dress, sort of like hugs him and gives him the cape of Superman. So there's this whole thing about how it's supposed to be again, this is a weird internet theory, but now when I read that, I'm looking for those themes in here too. I mean, maybe this is P.T. Anderson's way of doing the story of Superman. It's just interesting.
I doubt that. This is nerd theory being slapped on
you never know with PTA, is what I'm saying. Okay, why don't we move on to your number 2 film that shaped your anxieties? What do you got for us, Karan?
All right. So I have another movie from 2008, which sort of says a lot about where I was at in my head in 2008.
It does. Yeah.
And really, I watched these movies in 2009, which makes sense because I just come out of grad school. I just moved to LA. I was watching more movies. I was also alone and kind of figuring life out post school. So it makes sense. But my second movie is Rachel Getting Married from 2008. Like I said, directed by Jonathan Demme, starring Anne Hathaway, Rosemary DeWitt, Deborah Winger, Bill Irwin. Quick logline: a young woman who has been in and out of rehab for the past 10 years returns home for the weekend for her sister's wedding. So this movie represents to me the anxiety that exists in families. I am very lucky to come from a family where there was always a lot of openness and vulnerability and love and such. But there were always other people entering the core family zone who were probably not at the same wavelength as maybe we were. And through dinner parties or weddings or marriages, it kind of builds on the theme that I was talking about earlier with doubt, which is when you don't know where people who are supposed to be in your family circuit, where they're coming from and what baggage they are bringing. And then there are these unsaid feelings of past relationships, that the way they used to be, and maybe now they're broken and what have you. All of that always made me very, very anxious. And to kind of really bring it home and not to get too personal, if I ever saw my parents arguing about anything, I would be a ball of anxiety, to the point that my dad would have to come and hug me and tell me that no, we are not separating. It never even got to something like that. It was very normal day-to-day things. Oh, I asked you to bring milk and you brought rice instead. That's all it was. But
right.
I would be like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen and blah, blah, blah. So I think this movie kind of really gets at that for me, which is just the drama and the mess of families, but at the same time, the love that exists. And it's complicated. It's very messy. It can be. I mean, my family is like nowhere near what is shown in this movie, obviously.
Yeah.
But I can see it. But yeah, curious if you'd watched this movie before.
I had not seen this film. And actually this is, if there are any art designers listening, the only reason I never saw this movie is the poster was just terrible.
Oh yeah, very bad.
That is the only reason I've ever seen it. So just make sure you make up a good poster if you're poster designers out there. But no, I thought the movie was fantastic. I thought that Anne Hathaway's performance was incredible, and the handheld camera, which seemed like a gimmick in the first 5 minutes, actually just made this movie so much more powerful and raw. And yeah, all the things you hit on are essentially what this movie is in terms of anxieties, is the anxieties between families. And when you're on those, family vacations, or you're all like, we would go on trips to visit like extended family, we're all in the same house for the holidays, these things come up eventually. Like, obviously not as dramatic as people's deaths and the substance abuse issues that are talked about in this movie, but all those little things that maybe you're carrying something for the last 20 years and it just comes out in these situations, and remembering that you can't get away from your past or change your past, but that some you can suppress it sometimes, but in certain situations, especially around family, those things just rise to the top, and you sometimes are forced to address them in ways that maybe aren't healthy. But arguments can happen in that way, or resentments can be formed, or remember them. So it just shows that the people that you love the most, that can show you the most comfort and the most love, can also be the people that can give you the most anxiety in certain ways. And that is a lot of what this movie talks about in dramatic ways. Again, the things that happen in this movie are very dramatic, but I think do speak to the dynamics in any family, whether it's a great family or a family that always has problems. There are going to be these things in the past that come up, and a lot of the passive aggressive scenes in this movie too. I loved the sequence where the father is getting in this competition with loading a dishwasher with his new son-in-law, and it's just something kind of stupid. It's just, you're loading a dishwasher, but then both of them, they're bringing into this the baggage that they already have between this relationship of a new son kind of entering in, son-in-law trying to replace the father, potentially the dad not wanting to let go of this. You're the father of the house, you're the king of the house, and it's all of this is wrapped up in this little thing where there's time, and it's, it can load the dishwasher faster. And believe me, I've seen a lot of that in my life amongst family, of these things where it's like stupid and innocuous, but they care about it so much because there's so many other things that are in the background here. And that, again, is all those anxieties of the past sort of and the present coming into fruition. And I thought that scene, especially, I thought, wow, this is so brilliant about what actually got. And the acting of the dad, especially, was just amazing in that scene. And then throughout the whole film, actually, I'm not even sure who that actor was, but man, does he give a great performance.
Yeah, everybody's amazing. It's funny you picked that scene because I think about that scene whenever I load the dishwasher.
Oh no, you get anxiety?
Movie.
Or you're timing yourself. You're like, I can do it faster than
less than faster, more than I can fit everything. And I picked it up from this movie. Like this scene is synonymous to dishwasher in my mind since, and it's been since 2009. So it's crazy. Yeah. No, you're totally right. Like, it's never about the actual act. It's about all the other things, past and present and future, that are all at play. But what I love about this movie is that this movie and these subject matter themes, they have the potential of really crossing over the line and this movie can become melodramatic or
Oh, melodramatically.
campy very easily. It will still be effective, but it'll be a different movie. I think the genius of Jonathan Demme and everybody in this movie is that it's just simmering right at that level
Right.
where the anxieties are ratcheting up, but they seem very purposeful. They don't seem that, oh, guess what? We're going to do this now to kind of throw another thing at you. So you're even more anxious. Like her accident. It's not an accident. It's more like she drives herself into the tree at
Right.
at that fork,
Right.
which the predictable thing would have been, because when you're watching her, she's crying, she's leaving Deborah Winger's home, you would think, oh yeah, of course she's going to get hit by a truck. That's not what happens. She drives herself because she's sort of so pissed at everything. Like, this is just totally falling apart. What's there to live? You know, how do I heal from the things that have happened? And I have no support. I'm totally alone. It's a very different, it's very dramatic for sure. But what I love is that Demi is not playing with you, you know, and I hate that when directors or screenwriters, they're playing with the audience's vulnerabilities or laying it so thick that then I just totally tune out because it's not real anymore. Versus in real families, even though this is like ratcheted up, of course, there's a lot happening. Things are messy. Not every day or every moment is full of anxiety or anger because you still love these people. You fall in and out, you know, like one moment you might be having a great conversation with your sister who's like standing up for you. But then the very second moment, some past stupid thing that doesn't even matter, no one cares about, comes up and you're taken back to that old spot in your head.
Right.
And you still carry some, you know, feeling of resentment or what have you. And that's how it sort of works. And then meanwhile, every person's own coping mechanisms are also acting out. Like for the dad, hugging and kissing his daughters and holding them together all the time, that's his coping mechanism, that, oh, we're still a family, everything is fine. And he's louder than life and maybe even a little bit too animated. Some might even say he's hamming it up a little bit, but I think that's his coping mechanism. Meanwhile, Deborah Winger, being the Deborah Winger of all time, I mean, she's
great,
amazing. She's like, great wedding, bye, I'm leaving now. It's amazing. And then again, it's not laid thick as to why this family is the way it is, but in that scene you can see everything. You can kind of project what the original marriage might have been like. But Deborah as the mother and that father, Bill Irwin as the head of the family or what have you, it's all there, but it's not spoken to you. It's not talked to you, which I love that.
Yeah, me too. I think a lot of the credit of that is in the actors, but again, I think for me it goes back to the use of the handheld camera. It's hard to be, I think, melodramatic and overly dramatic in a format that is so supposedly raw and real. It just does immediately ground things for me because it is this handheld camera going through the shots instead of a very planned out. I mean, obviously this was planned out too, I'm sure, but a very, planned out tracking shot, or here's a dolly, or we're going to do a zoom in here. And it, even though I'm sure, again, this all is incredibly planned and staged in terms of what they did with the camera, but because it is handheld, you just sort of assume, oh, this is all natural and raw. So it makes the moments that could be overly dramatic not feel that way. At least that's how I sort of feel that's why the camera works so well for me, because it is like all the stuff, with the coping mechanism in Anne Hathaway through drugs and the horrible death of their younger brother, and all these things are in the background could definitely be in a soap opera. I mean, all these themes could be in a soap opera and definitely overly dramatized, but it's not. And I think, again, that is credit to Demme. And one thing that I think you touched on too, that this movie also is good at when it comes to anxieties, is coping mechanisms and people's different ones. And everyone has different coping mechanisms to deal with anxiety. And in this movie, you see all these different ways of that. The father, I think, trying to put too much emphasis. It's a form of denial in a way. It's like, no, everything's fine. We're a family. We're a family. Keep repeating that to yourself. Obviously, Anne Hathaway takes drugs as her coping mechanism. The mother just checks out. Like you said, Deborah Winger, just like, it's fine. I don't need to worry about this. And it's just interesting seeing how all these members of family deal with things differently, which is also true in real life. Like, every person is different. Every person experiences anxieties, and every person deals with that in a different way. And I just loved how this movie touched on so many of those forms of that was just great. I thought this movie was really powerful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I will say though, on the handle camera piece, like I agree. At the same time, that can also become quite gimmicky, like you touched on earlier, and it doesn't. The other
Hmm.
thing that can also get quite gimmicky and annoying is all the music rehearsals that are happening for the wedding,
Mm.
which in some that is the score of the movie. There's no other score in the movie. It's the people who are playing who are at the wedding, which could at some point can get irritating and grating, which in fact Anne Hathaway's character actually screams about that. Like, will you stop playing the music? Which I think is so incredible. It's sort of natural woven in
Yeah,
the movie. But it makes sense because, yeah, on one hand, it is working to ratchet up the tension, which we will see in some
exactly.
of your other picks, where there's like a
Hmm.
lot of music used, and
Yep.
we touched on that in Punch Drunk Love as well. But again, it's effortless because these people are here, and it would make sense because these are musicians. Bill
Right.
Irwin was a musician.
Hmm.
Sydney, who's Rachel's husband to be, is a musician. He has all these friends. This is a very quirky wedding with multi-cultures and things that are coming together. It would make sense, but it also works as a device to
Definitely.
ratchet up the anxiety. But it's
For
done,
sure.
you know, enough effortlessly as possible to not make it come off as too obvious or too gimmicky.
Yeah, what was interesting about that too that I read after I saw the film was that the
Mm,
music was recorded live on the set. So they were actually
makes
playing
sense.
with the actors to probably make them have anxiety too. It's like
Yeah,
adds to the whole thing that the actors are going through. So instead of having it be added in later in post, they were recording
I
and
love
playing,
that.
which is super rare to have a score being played live while a movie's being filmed is a very odd thing. So I thought that that was very interesting. You could tell in the film too the way it was being picked up, the sound, it felt like it was diegetic music essentially, which means
Exactly.
music that is part of the story and not music added in as a soundtrack or a score. Thought that was a really clever move that yes did make me as an audience member definitely feel more anxiety in that situation, and then probably made the actors feel that way too to
Yeah.
help them get better into their characters in their moment. So yeah, I just think this movie needs a better poster, basically, because the poster's terrible. It's so bad. It's one of the worst posters I've ever seen. But the movie I really enjoyed. I mean, I enjoy sounds odd because it was
Yeah.
a great film, but it definitely really affected me, and
Oh
it
yeah, it's
was a
very
really moving and
affecting.
powerful movie. And Anne Hathaway too, like what an incredible performance. This is
I
before she was
think
such a known actress. I mean, they knew her for Disney films, but this is a big breakout for her for sure.
Yeah, I think this is after Prada, so it's like right that
Hmm.
time where everything is happening. I think this is her career best performance to date, in my mind. This is not an original thought, but I think this sort of feels to me like Demi's kind of apex, if you will, because he gets to combine his dramatic storytelling, but
Hmm.
also his documentary filmmaking because of the form factor. It's kind of a concert of sorts that's happening with all these musicians and this
Right.
playing at this movie, but it's also very dramatic. So I love that, and it's so sad that he left us so soon. He's probably one of my favorite directors.
Yeah, it's a very eclectic output as well. Like these movies do not feel like they're necessarily from the same or look like they're necessarily from the same director. And I say that as a
Yeah,
compliment, not that he doesn't have a sense of style or
right.
he's not an auteur, but this film definitely to me I was feeling a lot of the same ways. Like wow, this is really just a big artistic statement for him, and not my favorite movie of his. I think Silence of the
Yeah,
Lambs will always be that for me, but this definitely is one right up there.
yeah.
Glad you put this on the list, even though again it wasn't an easy watch.
Now,
Made me anxious, but as a movie, I definitely will return to for sure. I thought it was great.
all right. What is your number two movie that shaped your anxieties?
So my number two film is Requiem for a Dream from 2000. This is directed and co-written by Darren Aronofsky, starring Jared Leto, Ellen Burstyn, Jennifer Connelly, Marlon Wayans, and Keith David. The IMDb plot summary: the drug-induced utopias of four Coney Island people are shattered when their addictions run deep. So for me, the theme of in terms of the anxiety is something actually you touched on earlier in this episode, which is that loss of control, where you don't
Mm.
really have control over your life or your decisions. And in this movie, it's exemplified by the drug addiction that all four of the main characters have that lets them or causes them to lose control of your life because now it's just basically driven by trying to get that next hit, whether it's heroin or to Ellen Burstyn's character, the weight loss drugs. But the other part I think that this movie too touches on in terms of anxieties, I've definitely felt, because I definitely, like, much like you, loss of control is something. Whenever I feel that a little bit, I start not like a full on panic attack or anything like that, but I'm very uncomfortable. Like, I like to feel like I'm always in control. And the other thing that I definitely can relate to as well is that a lot of times having a dream or something that you want, and a goal that is very far away in your life, and too focused on that and not enough on the present, or when you think that's slipping away in any kind of way, you start to panic, which definitely, again, the title is Requiem for a Dream. So that's another big theme in this film too, is something I definitely can relate to a lot. That's something I sometimes think about the future too much, and that it gives you a sense of loss of control in a way, because all you're fixated on is, well, what is that thing 10, 15 years out? What is the ultimate thing that I want to do? Instead of just being focused in the moment, being present and enjoying the life that you have, instead of trying to think too much about some new destination of some place you want to get to, which also each one of these characters too, which we'll get into more when we discuss the film, has a dream that they want to achieve. And that also, I think, gives them sometimes unhealthy desires. They take unhealthy steps to try to achieve that dream, and none of them get it. I mean, this is probably one of the more depressing films ever made, but curious your thoughts on the film, if you'd seen it before, and then we can dive more into the analysis.
Yeah, I had avoided this movie up till now just based on the posters and the stills of Ellen Burstyn with, crazy hair and everything. And I was like, oh, this is Darren Aronofsky. This is going to be, grating and a hard watch and all of that, which it is. But I'm glad to have finally watched it, because all the themes that you said, they do come to life for sure. One of my kind of personal anxiety things, which didn't make it on the list, is, I mean, it sort of does with Rachel getting married, but it's about when people make poor choices. And I'm always like yelling from the inside that, why are you doing this? You could be doing something better. And this movie is all about that for sure. All these people make very, very poor choices across the board, some on their own volition and some because they can't, because they are under the influence of drugs so hard. And it's sort of sad and depressing to see that, because they actually have a lot going on in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the sad truth for a lot of people, I think, that it's so difficult to see what you have and just focus on the dream, right? And what you don't have. And there's a very thin line between a dream that aspires you and inspires you in a positive way versus not. And this is all about the negative side of it, of course. There's also a very interesting thing, and I guess commentary about television and what that does, and all these game shows and consumerism and such, that it can really obsess all of us, that we are all, I mean, there's a reason why lottery tickets still exist. I've never played one.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been into gambling. I've been to Vegas many times, but which is sort of why it's a fun place, but I usually avoid it, because in my mind it sort of is about that. And I have no problem, like, you do you, of course.
Sure,
but
sure, yeah.
But it always makes me a little bit sad from the inside, where I'm like, oh, this is what you're constantly thinking about, that, oh, what if there's like the silver bullet, golden ticket that might solve my problems? And I get it where that comes from, of course, because we live in a world that is unfair for the most part. But then there's also hard work and other ability and luck and so many other things that play a role in terms of what might fix your situation. And we as humans, I mean, that's our survivalist instinct as well, right? We're always trying to find the way out, or the easiest path to survival. So I think this movie has a lot on its mind, which is, as a movie, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, because you'd watched it when it came out and you've seen it since. Me watching this movie for the first time now in this year, 2023, it sort of feels like a school student project movie, where there are a lot of ideas and all these kind of, repetition, almost like animated drug consumption things with the light, eyes flaring up and what have you, like it happens again and again. It's very effective. And of course, this induces a lot of anxiety. And I thought about those images a lot, even after I had watched the movie. But in the process of watching the movie, I was like, okay, I get it. Like, this is kind of very, student project-y. That said, I was still very impressed by it. I think I'm more impressed by the movie and the filmmaking and the performances than loving it. And I don't even know if you can love it, because it's such a hard watch, if you will. But yeah, I think, to me, with movies, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, is that it takes a while for this movie for you to develop any kind of sense of care for who these people are, because the movie just dives into
Oh yeah,
all
right
the stuff
away.
that is happening. And
Hmm.
for a while, I was like, why do I even care? Why should I sort of sit this? But then the movie sort of like harangues you to actually do care because things get so bad. And I did care then by the end of it. I think that scene when Jared Leto comes to visit his mother, Ellen Burstyn, and she's already been on the pills, and
Hmm.
he is excited about this kind of other thing that he has going on, and she's excited about, and just the anxiety and the kicking of the drugs and the drama of their past relationship. I thought that scene was very powerful and very moving, and it was amazing. But other than that, yeah, this movie definitely wants to ratchet up the anxiety, and I can see Darren do that, and that's the
Definitely.
part that I don't enjoy. I want it to be more effortless. I want to, just live the lives of these characters with them, not be told to do so.
Yeah, just in case people haven't seen the film before, we'll talk a little about just the techniques that he used, and I definitely want to touch
Mm,
on the things you were talking about. So there's a lot of handheld shots, but then not. There's a lot of split screen, especially in the beginning, that is very disorienting. There's fisheye lenses. There's this
mm-hmm.
great technique that was sort of popularized by this movie for a while and then stopped, where the filmmaker hooks the camera up to the person. So when they're moving
Right.
around, they're frozen in the center of the
Prototype.
screen, but everything around them is spinning, which is a thing even some MTV show stole after this movie. But at the time, it was really a revolutionary thing, at least that
I
I haven't
bet.
seen. And then the movie starts with longer scenes. And then by the end, the scenes are like 10, 15 seconds long. There's a lot of editing. So it's definitely berates you for sure and hits
Yeah.
you over the head and kind of forces you to feel, because you can't help but feel because of the filmmaking techniques that were involved. Even the sound
Right.
design is a lot of loud noises, then silence, then
Right.
there's breathing, then there's the score was one of my favorite scores we'll get into in a bit, but it's definitely relentless. And just especially towards the end, it's just loud, sort of like banging, banging, banging to make you feel. And yes, that definitely, I mean, at the time, I saw this in the theaters, my first Aronofsky movie. This is like a revelation to me when I saw this at
I
18.
bet.
It was a movie, it was also like, wasn't really released because it was unrated and they were trying not to get the movie out there because the distributors thought it was too dangerous or whatever. So there was a little
Mm,
bit of that mystique to it too. And, I watched this movie a ton in college and would listen to the score over and over again for years. I haven't seen it in maybe like 10 years, and definitely it still for sure affects me. And the ending of this movie, I think, is super powerful, which we'll get into when I talk more about the
mhm.
dreams piece of it. But, Aronofsky at his worst can come across as if he's trying too hard, like a student filmmaker. And I definitely can see that a lot in this film for sure. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. And when he works, it really works. When he
Right.
doesn't, it definitely comes across as, yeah, a little bit amateurish. And you can for sure see that in this, though. Again, it was beginning of his career, it was only his second movie. So you
Right.
give him a little bit of a pass than you do on more recent ones, where I feel like I felt that way on a film like Mother or something that I felt was the same sort of, again, very kind of amateurish. So I totally get what you're saying
Mhm.
of the movie is very manipulative. That's the
Right.
best way to,
That's
to
the
kind of
word.
describe it for me.
Yeah.
It's incredibly manipulative, that even if you didn't care for these characters, you still feel impacted emotionally because of all the filmic techniques that are
Right.
at play here, which is a reason why, like I said at the outset of this podcast, like I don't consider myself an anxious person, but I put this movie on and I feel that. And yes, it is all these techniques which are definitely at play here, but once I broke it down and had more self-reflection and dug into these underlining themes of loss of control, which definitely gives me anxiety, and this whole idea of focusing too much on your dreams and too much on the future, not being in the present, can cause you anxiety because you never know whether the future is going to happen. So you worry about that. You're worried about that. And I think this movie, when with each of these characters, which we'll get into in a second, they have their dreams, and that I think leads to their downfall as much as the drug addiction does too. So I'm not surprised you felt that way coming at this movie now, that it does feel a little bit, yeah, student filmy, if you want
Yeah.
to put it like that.
Yeah. And in that sense, a little, I guess, disappointing too, because I'd heard so much about Ellen Burstyn's performance, and
Mm-hmm.
many still argue that she should have won that year.
She
I
should
forget
have. Yeah.
who else was
Doesn't
nominated,
matter
and
who,
she's
but she
very
should have. Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
But I do think that because the filmmaking techniques are at like a 352,
Mm-hmm.
it does actually overtake the performance. And it's sort of hard to draw the line between what is the filmmaking technique or the director's hand versus the performance, because I wish there was more breathing room given to her, because this is such an incredible lifetime part, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And if the movie just had allowed her to kind of breathe even more, this performance would have been, one for the books. But she's still amazing in it. There's no question about it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, the movie leaves the audience with not a lot of room to breathe either. I mean, there are a couple
No.
quiet moments that are affecting, but I actually was looking back on it now. Again, it's been 10 years. Was just still thinking all the performances across the board. Jared Leto, Jennifer Connelly, Ellen Burstyn, and Marlon Wayans too. Like they're all giving incredible performances that must have been very difficult to do. A lot of the the what happens in this movie is probably very difficult on the actors as well. But getting back to just those dreams, I just want to touch on that, and also respond to what you said about the infomercial thing, which dawned on me for the first time actually in this most recent rewatch. Ellen Burstyn is dreaming to be on TV. She's an old lady who also wants to look good, and maybe she's dreaming of her youth, I think, and wanting to capture that adoration to be on TV on this game show that she keeps watching. So she gets addicted to diet pills. And Jennifer Connelly's character has a desire to be a clothes designer and open up a design shop, and that's what she wants to do, but she needs the money for it, and that's why she gets involved with drugs herself, and then eventually prostitution. Jared Leto's character, I think, is just his dream is to be with her and be happy with Jennifer Connelly, and there's these great scenes where they flash forward to him walking down the pier and she's there at the end, and that's he just wants to be happy with her. And then Marlon Wayans, which I think this gets the least screen time, but honestly for me is actually the most effective towards the end of the movie, where I think he just is craving his mother's love and just remembers back to being in his mom's arms. And you see all these things because they're obsessed just with the end goal and not necessarily the destination to get there. They all make choices and shortcuts and get addicted to drugs and, again, prostitution and all these different things to try to get to this dream, and they're not focused on the reality. And the end montage to me still is like incredibly effective, where you see each of these characters wrestling with the fact that their dreams are now dead. Jared Leto doesn't have an arm anymore. He's alone. So Jennifer Connelly's totally out of the picture. Jennifer Connelly's there clutching that the drugs, because her with surrounded by just tatters of all these designs that she had, showing that her life is totally in shambles. And Marlon Wayans basically being sick in a prison, curling up, and you see this his mom superimposed in the background, trying to be in his mom's arms that he'll never be able to get. And then Ellen Burstyn, again, just her friends crying when they see the state the drug addiction has put her in when she's in that mental institution. Just incredible. And each of the characters are getting, during that montage, sort of moving into the fetal position, sort of like going back to this time when things are innocent and safe, because they've totally destroyed their entire lives. And that is an extreme version of why a dream is something that can be dangerous to have and can cause you anxiety, that I've definitely felt too, of like, oh, what, I'm not going to get this thing. Oh, I want to get this thing in 10 years. And, it's giving me a little bit of anxiety, but it's better just to kind of be in the present and just focus on your happiness now and not some end goal. But the infomercial thing was interesting, because I think that was a framing device where Ellen Burstyn's character watches infomercial, and there's these sort of fantasy sequences where she's on the show. And I think that, again, just speaks to how dreams can be fake and a false promise and a scam in a way, in the same way that the infomercial sort of culture is too. Like, oh, they're selling this juice drug or something. I don't even know what the infomercial is supposed to be, some juice thing. But that's not going to work, because all those things are a scam. And the same way that these dreams that she's trying to get to are also, a false promise, just in the way the infomercial pieces were. So I don't know. That connection didn't come to me until I saw it for this rewatch. But
no, I couldn't agree more. Because I think most people deep down, they sort of know that, this drug or this like exercising weird machine or, whatever you're buying on QVC and such, or it's not going to actually give you what you're looking for, but it's the hope of it, know, or it's the escape of it, that, okay, for a little bit, if this makes me feel okay, then why not? Yeah. And that line between the little bit to the point that you're totally in it is actually much thinner than you think. That's what the movie highlights, that you sort of see the progression, or really the digression, of these people over the course of time, which is not a lot of time, actually. It's crazy.
Like a year, I think, right?
Yeah,
it's basically they have seasons. It's broken up into seasons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's a very, one of the most depressing movies I've ever seen, I think. And I just want to mention again, like the score, I think Clint Mansell's score, just incredible. That main theme, which now was used in like the Lord of the Rings trailers, and it's sort of become larger than even this film. But every time I hear that, it just brings me right back into like the depression and the anxiety and everything this movie brings to me. But for some reason, I did listen to it a lot while studying in college. It was something I enjoyed putting the score on a lot. Okay, moving on then. What is your number one movie that shaped your anxiety?
All right. My number one is Whiplash from 2014, directed by Damien Chazelle, starring Miles Teller, J.K. Simmons. Quick logline: a promising young drummer enrolls at a cutthroat music conservatory where his dreams of greatness are mentored by an instructor who will stop at nothing to realize a student's potential. Very good description, actually.
That is, yeah.
So for me, this movie represents my anxiety about just, I care about the work I do professionally, and that anxiety of sort of not rising up to the occasion for whatever reason. And
Mhm.
usually it's not about what other people are asking for, it's more of what I see myself do. Am I rising up to everything that I set out to do? But then there's also sometimes fear of failure, and mostly it drives me, there's like a deadline and a certain thing at work has to be completed, and how are we going to do it? It's actually a bit of a rush. But
Mhm.
there is like a sense of anxiety for sure that is kind of perpetuating. And I obviously never get to a place where it's totally succumb me and I'm in like a panic mode. I don't think I've ever panicked, but there's definitely been moments where the discomfort is more than what I want. And I'm lucky to be surrounded by, friends, family, my own wit or what have you, to kind of then have the toolkit to power parse through that. But
Mhm.
I think it comes from a place of that I care about this, and I care about not letting myself and other people who depend on me down, essentially. And I think this movie really ratchets that up in the form of this young drummer who really cares about drumming. He cares
Mhm.
about making a name for himself. He knows that he has something, and maybe that's sort of where the problem is at, because he is a cheeky one himself. But then enters this demonic figure in J.K. Simmons' character who, from his point of view, is really trying to bring out the great of the great from inside these people. But the big kind of moral question of the movie is, at what cost? How
Mhm.
much is okay to push? But before I go further, I'm sure you'd watched this movie before.
Nope, never
You
seen it.
hadn't.
Yeah, this is a
I'm
hat trick
shocked.
episode, three new movies. So
Wow.
yeah, this is one that I sort of missed at the time and just never kind of came around to seeing it. And I'm not a Damon Chazelle fan
Right.
at all, so I didn't really felt no motivation to go back to it. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was definitely really affecting, and for me, definitely brought me back to those times when teachers or coaches were using anxiety slash fear as a motivator, which
Yeah.
I don't respond well to that, honestly. Like if they're going to do this, like I actually stop caring and just
Yeah.
pull back. And but some people do, and much like the character in this film, actually, the main character, he is motivated by this and
Yeah.
tries harder and harder and harder. And it's that technique is working with him because he actually is becoming, I think, a better drummer because of the pressure and the anxiety that J.K. Simmons is putting on him. I mean, a lot of the scenes early on where he makes him go back again, know that part again
Right.
and again and again and again. I mean, that definitely reminded me a lot of coaches that I've had in different sports that I play, where it's like, no, you have to go back and it's the same drill and then drill over and over. Nope, that's not it. Go again. Doesn't matter. Nope, sorry, go again. And I was having almost like PTSD a little bit for some of
Mhm.
those early scenes for sure, but it definitely did, you know, is a form of anxiety where not only as a motivator, but like you said, of like, am I going to be able to accomplish this thing in whether it's a professional setting, or just, a sports setting or what have you. Like I've definitely, or academic setting, like I've definitely felt that for sure. Been in the same shoes as the main character in this film, but again, I just don't respond well to that. I prefer the positive motivation versus like the Full Metal Jacket style yelling that J.K. Simmons puts in. But it raises a lot of amazing questions. And I think the performance, especially out of Simmons, are just really,
Amazing.
really fantastic.
Yeah, he's like incredible, and we'll get into that too. But yeah, I'm the same way. I don't respond to that. I tune out. Luckily, I didn't have much of that at school, not that I
Mm,
can remember. But they've definitely been, bosses or leaders at work who try to do that, and it's my least favorite thing about working anywhere is
yeah.
when there's a culture of fear,
Hmm.
or a culture of, that, oh, if somebody does something wrong, we're going to come after you. it's very clear to me that that kind of way of leading actually doesn't get the best out of the people. And you might be able to put something out the door and maybe even have a win in the short term, but that's going to be very, very short lived. And I get it why people resort to that, right? It's often self-proclaimed type A,
Yes.
very, very capable people. But
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, because of their own baggage, their own experiences, or their own ability to sort of dive or dig deeper into how do you actually truly motivate and lead people, the easier way is to harangue
Yep.
and, create a culture of fear and basically make everybody do what you think is right,
Right.
as opposed to approaching things with a very question based or problem based mindset, which then empowers people to then solve. But like you were saying, there are people who do respond to that.
Right.
And we do see Miles Teller's character in the movie really elevating in terms of his craft, like where he is in the beginning of the movie from a drumming standpoint to where the movie ends at this amazing performance that he totally takes control of the entire stage,
Right.
even over J.K. Simmons's character. Like he is now the conductor and the drummer and the main star and show of the entire performance. That arc is incredible. So if you look at that, you could almost justify this kind of behavior. But the point is, somebody else who's a past student actually commits suicide during
Mm-hmm.
the movie. What is the cost of that? And then even in Miles Teller's case, yes, he's crossed the chasm in terms of his craft, but what kind of human has he become? You
Right.
know? And how long is he going to go? Is he just going to play for the next few years and become an all-time great, but then totally fall apart because his mind, body, all of it would be totally ruined? A, and B, how many other people's lives is he going to ruin? Because he's probably going to perpetuate the same kind of way of working potentially. And then relationships and such. And,
Right.
my biggest heartbreaking scene of the movie is when his father looks at him play, when he's bleeding and he's taken charge of everything. And yes, he's soaring, but the father can see it that my son is also, he's transformed to somebody else.
Right.
And I don't know how I feel about that. And that to me, this time, this watch especially, I was tearing up just like watching, as from a father's point of view, what it might feel like to watch his son go through this journey.
Yeah, it's definitely, I'm on the same page with you in terms of this is not how I like to be motivated at work at all. And actually, it's reminding me of this conversation back to our very first episode, Work Experiences, in a movie that I brought in, Swimming with Sharks, which is
Right.
a workplace version of this. Kevin Spacey plays an agent that basically does the same thing to his assistant that J.K. Simmons does to Miles Teller in this movie. It's interesting, though, to me, because I think this movie asks a lot of questions around, is this right? But through the vein of art.
Mm-hmm.
And for myself personally, art is the only area that I feel that this actually is warranted and okay, because it's not someone's livelihood. They can step away at any time. Artists produce art that is for everybody else. So it's not like a sports thing where the glory that you have is essentially your own glory. And I don't know. I feel like this is a question that is not as easy to answer when it comes to, should you lead with fear to get good art out of people?
Mm-hmm.
I hear these stories. Oh, this director's so horrible on set, or all this horrible set. Yeah, but if the movie's good, honestly, like, I'm glad that was what it cost. There was a crucible there that the artist had to get into. And if the art that came out of it was incredible, I think that for me, at least personally, like the cost is not as, I don't care about it as much as if it was a business or a sporting thing or a personal relationship. Yeah, that totally out of bounds. You should never act like this at all. I don't think fear is a motivator, or all the psychological games and torture that he was putting Miles Teller through. There's a great scene when he keeps, oh, okay, you're the drummer now. Actually, no, you sub out. We're
Oh
bringing
my
this other guy. Oh,
gosh.
actually, no, it's this guy. But the whole time he was just trying to push Miles Teller. Those other people were pawns in this psychological game. Again, totally unacceptable. But in my mind, I think in art, I don't know. I think maybe it is if this is a film set or a band or anything related to art. I don't know. For some reason, to me, that line becomes a lot more blurry, where it's very clear if it is every other aspect of society. I don't know. That's why I thought that question was very interesting, that it was raised. And even at the end of this movie, you're not supposed to think this is some heroic thing he did in terms of, bleeding and taking control and turning into this person we don't know, like you were just mentioning. we don't know. Like the movie's like, I don't know. You make it your mind of whether this is good that he'd made this decision or not. Instead of just totally walked away like he does at the end of the second act.
Yeah,
It's interesting. I think it raises some interesting
that's a
questions.
great question. I mean, I agree with you to a point. I think it depends on, to me personally, to what limit,
Mhm.
like ultimately somebody just losing their mind or even losing their life over anything
Yeah,
just
life, I would draw the line on that. Yes, right.
doesn't make
No one
sense
should
at
die
all.
for art. Yeah.
And yeah, this probably a way to kind of really push somebody without kind of totally ruining them. And
Mhm.
I think that's where I think this gets tricky in my mind. But yeah, as a movie though, like I think this is my favorite Damien Chazelle movie. I think I mentioned this when we covered our LA movies and I talked about La La Land, which I do like a lot, but I think
Mhm.
again, I don't know Damien Chazelle personally, but there is a certain sense of anxiety that I think he just carries whenever I watch an interview of his and such. And I know this movie Whiplash is very much rooted in his personal experience because he himself was either a drummer or played some instrument and such. It's not autobiographical in any by any means, but
Mhm.
I think these feelings of overachieving or wanting to overachieve and not fail and push yourself and the anxiety that comes with it, it just feels like this is something very close to him and he can portray that as opposed to grand feelings of love, which is sort of what La La Land is about and
Right.
such. Like
Right.
that stuff never worked on me because I think it just has to come from within you. Even First Man works actually because it is about a very lonely, highly accomplished person who wants to kind of do a lot but is unable to express themselves emotionally. Really, that sort of still works. I won't
Mm.
even talk about Babylon. It's a
No,
whole other
trash. Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, I'm still not a fan of his after seeing this. And actually this movie too felt much in the way that we just talked about with Requiem for a Dream. This does feel like a very young
Oh
filmmaker
yeah,
who's relying
definitely.
on tricks, and it feels kind of forced sometimes that he's trying to push something into the film. It's just I read that this was a short film first,
Right.
and definitely the first act feels like what that film was, and it's I don't want to say perfect, but it's near perfect. It's great. And
Yeah.
then the movie starts kind of getting a little messy when the car accident comes in. I'm like, okay, this movie, I'm out of it. Then it
Yeah.
pulls me back in, and it feels a little amateur-y. Like again, it's a director who's just starting out as a second movie, I think. So I'm not faulting him for that necessarily, but I still feel that in his work, in the same way that Aronofsky at his worst, he still feels like a tryhard. And Damien, for me, has always felt like a bit of a tryhard.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
I also got that sense from this film too. So I liked it. I didn't love it or think it's like the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's mainly just J.K. Simmons' performance. I walked away from this being like, damn, that guy, this is a good career making performance. But I agree with you that I think the movies of his that work the best are the ones that are about a tortured genius because that's what he considers himself. Which again, I'm like, dude, like, come on, be a little humble. You're not Stanley Kubrick here or Alfred Hitchcock, or like just take a step back. He thinks he is, and that's why he's trying to do all these torture genius movies. Even La La Land's a little bit about that too, right?
A little
No one
bit.
respects
Yeah.
me. I'm so great, but why doesn't anyone realize that?
Right.
Um,
Although I think this movie consciously, unconsciously questions that,
yeah, that's
which is
true.
why I
That's
think it
true.
actually works really well in my mind. And then other aspects, like Miles is amazing. Like
He's good
he's
in
an
this. Yeah.
interesting actor. Like we'll see what his career trajectory looks like. But this role and this performance it's quite easy for an audience member, I think, to tune out after a while when you've seen somebody just being beaten down. And I think the performance that Miles gives like
Mm-hmm.
keeps your interest going and doesn't lead into apathy
Right.
or you just totally tune out. And a lot of variation there because what he has to do is be beaten down, but also start to transform a little bit into J.K. Simmons as well.
Right.
Because he is becoming that. So there's these like very complicated arcs that are happening at the same time, which is, I think he plays that so well. And
Mm-hmm.
then the music, like Justin Hurwitz, who's Damien Chazelle's, roommate and collaborator, like all the songs and things that are being played in the movie, they're all original, I think. So a lot of them are,
I
I
thought
think.
that Whiplash song wasn't though. Like the main
Maybe
pieces
that
they're
one
playing,
is
I
in.
thought
I
those
don't
were
know
not. But
for
I'm
for
not a
sure.
jazz guy at all. I'm
Yeah,
not a
but a lot of
yeah.
people, a lot of pieces in the movie are
Oh, okay.
made for the movie, and the movie is scored beautifully. I think it's amazing to your point to place this in the art world, in the music world, where this
Mm-hmm.
sort of happens a lot. So, yeah, a lot of great choices made from an editing standpoint and such. So, I'm definitely a fan. Like anxiety driving enough, but I actually want to watch it as
Hmm.
opposed
Oh,
to something that I just like, I can't even watch this.
yeah.
Okay. What is your number one movie that shaped your anxieties?
So my number one film is Uncut Gems in 2019. Maybe she said Uncut Jams. Remember that meme? This is directed and co-written by the Safdie brothers, starring Adam Sandler, again, my king of anxiety,
Yeah.
Julia Fox, Kevin Garnett, and the wickedly talented Adele Gazim, which is Adina Menzel. So the plot summary of this film is: with his debts mounting and angry collectors closing in, a fast-talking New York City jeweler risks everything in the hopes of staying afloat and alive. So for me, this is around obsession with a goal and fixating and ruminating on a very specific thing that you want drives you totally crazy, which is definitely something that I have a tendency. When I'm saying I'm not an anxious person, I don't think I am. But this is my area that I can find myself getting anxious about for sure, of like fixating on a specific, oh, I have to do the dishes. Oh, and nothing else matters. I just got to get that done. Or there's a
Yeah, I
project at
have
work
that
and I'm
too.
like, I don't care. Like, I just have to. This is the only thing I care about. It's the only thing I care about. And I definitely fall into that trap a lot of the times. And Howard, who's Adam Sandler's character in this movie, from the first scene, it's just like all he is just placing bets, making wagers, making bets, borrowing money, in debt here, have to pay this guy back. It's all he's doing is chasing that high of not even necessarily the win. It's just like the high of the bet. Just place the bet, and
Mhm.
are you going to win or not? And I think this movie just does, again, to Sandler's performance and everything in this film does a great job just from the first frame all the way to the end. I saw this, like I said at the outset, I saw this movie once. I'm like, I can never watch this again. This like tapped into these anxieties in me that I was like so uncomfortable watching this movie, but I thought it was still brilliant. I had to bring it back into this episode as my number one. And I'm glad I did see it again. I think the movie felt better the second time for me, but I'll pause there. If this is a movie you've seen before, and what was your reaction to it?
Yeah, I started it one time before, and the sound design of the movie, which is all purposeful, I just couldn't
Yeah.
take it. And I couldn't get through the entire movie, even though I, from the get go, appreciated Adam Sandler's performance and what was
Yeah.
happening and
Yeah.
admired the filmmakers. But it was, yeah, I just couldn't watch it. But I always wanted to come back to it because I knew there was something here and this movie is so talked about and such. So I was glad
So you
to
made it
come
through.
to it again.
You got through it. Okay.
I got through it, and I'm glad I did, even though I was very trepidatious of how this is going to go. I think I was a lot more prepared for the sound design and how that's supposed to go and supposed to be. So I think that really helped. But yeah, I totally agree with you. That is something that I can also get fixated on. I don't think the movie, for me personally, lands the way it probably lands on you, where all those things are getting triggered more and more. I can sort of separate that out because it's there in me, but maybe it's to a lesser degree or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the filmmaking aspects of this movie, just the way we talked about with Requiem as well, they definitely ratchet up quite a bit. And his performance and the fast cutting and the fast talking and all the background sounds, just this world, which is kind of seedy and odd, but also alluring and interesting and captivating. Like that in itself is a mind trick, right? As you're watching the movie, even if all the other paraphernalia were not at display, I think just this world would be very anxiety driving because it's just so odd. And then you place all these characters and Adam Sandler's character, who's in this weird predicament from as sort of being shot at from all angles, really. I mean, talk about, a pot that's just going to not like blow over but explode, and you feel that from the very get-go. So I really admired and appreciated this movie the second time. I still think I can't watch it again. And I will say, and maybe this is with more distance, like this movie to me doesn't feel like a school project the way
not at all. This is
like this
top-notch
like
filmmaking.
top-notch filmmaking.
Yeah.
Even though a lot is at play, it never feels like a try hard.
No, totally agree. Yeah, but from like the first scene, he's getting calls about needing to pay someone back, which is also something that gives me anxiety too. Like, I don't like owing people money. I always want to make sure I immediately pay my debts. I don't have any debt. I don't like having debt. That also gives me anxiety too. And this whole movie of just watching him always be in debt and trying to triangulate, okay, this guy owes me money, so I'm going to collect it over here and bring it over here. But then I have the money, but immediately have to place a bet. He just has to place a bet on everything, even though he's owing people money all over town and it's dragging his entire life down. But that's an addiction to him. Like that anxiety of he almost is addicted to the anxiety of that feeling, because it's not about the win necessarily. It's living in the moment of, am I going to win or not? That desire to win is just so, and for me, like very triggering for me. I think Adam Sandler, again, because for me, he's like the avatar of anxiety for me. And his performance in this is the best thing he's ever done. I mean, starting with totally Punch Drunk Love, actually, the fact that he was able to get here in terms of dramatic role is just inspiring, just as an actor, how he's able to pull this off in this film. Just incredible.
Yeah, like I was saying with Punch Drunk Love as well, like I don't think I could watch anybody else in a movie like this with this kind of setup. It'll be even a harder watch. But there's something about Adam Sandler's groundedness and niceness, or that you develop empathy for him no matter what. And you root for him and you cringe when he makes poor choices, that if you could just calm the hell down and think about this, it might get better just a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's true, which for me, again, doesn't work much in these comedies, but do work in these roles. And I also just want to do a shout out to Kevin Garnett, who's a basketball player, plays himself in this movie.
So good.
Does a great job. And I love how his character also becomes obsessed with this opal that he thinks is giving him these powers to be winning in the Celtics playoff games. Much like, again, Adam Sandler's character, driven by this obsession. He also just looks into this opal and it's like, this is everything that he wants. He's willing to pay all this money for it. And all these things just, again, hits on the theme where it's not just Sandler in this movie that isn't obsessive. Like, it even, his obsessiveness like rubs off on Kevin Garnett too, who does, again, a great job as a non-actor, I think, in this movie, playing himself, but still, I think he does.
Which is even harder to do, I might argue, right?
That's true.
Yourself. So
that's true. Yeah, The Weeknd makes a fun cameo too, actually, in this movie.
Oh, right.
That I think is a bizarre cameo, but something that also is funny, I guess, speaking to his Sandler sort of feeling old too. That's another theme in this movie as well, the anxiety of feeling old. He gets that colonoscopy in the beginning of the movie and thinks he might be dying. And there's all these things hanging over his head that are driving him. It's like a ball of every anxiety you can have, I think, is in this movie and representing this character, which, he just does such a good job portraying.
Really good. On sort of the dream obsessiveness part that you highlighted in this movie and a little bit in Requiem as well, that's also very human. And like we were talking about the question that Whiplash raises, that is this good or bad? You could argue that it's these dreams that have pushed people to accomplish way more than they might have otherwise,
True.
And what is sort of that line that you cross that line is very thin again, because you're like, okay, maybe just this time this might work. What if this opal actually gives me superpowers to win every game? Or what if this diamond opal rock or whatever solves all my debt problems? Like, it might actually. So I think it's interesting that what drives us and what drives us crazy.
That's true. Though I think Sandler's character in this movie, Howard, is different than Whiplash and even Requiem, all those dreams, because I feel like with him, if he did get a big bet in and win like $10 million, it's not like he would be like, okay, great, I'm done, I'm gonna go like buy a house and relax and have a good time. He would immediately play, okay, well, I'm gonna bet all this on this other stuff. Like, for him, it isn't even that destination, that dream. Whereas I do feel like
it's the bet, it's that
Whiplash,
gambling personality.
When he reaches that goal of now he's this great jazz drummer, I think that's what when he accomplishes that, I think he will not stop, but like feel satisfied in his accomplishment. And with Requiem for a Dream, if any of those characters had gotten what they wanted, like the looking nice on TV or love for his mom or a good relationship, that the drugs would fall away. They don't need it anymore. But with Sandler in this movie, he is never satiated at all. Like, there's nothing that will make him stop this obsession of always being, am I going to win or not? Like, that is like the worst kind of anxiety I think you can have, which is why I'm not a fan of, I don't gamble myself, and it's hard for me sometimes to watch other people do it because I get a little bit like, oh my god, like, what's going to happen
for
here?
You.
Exactly. Yeah. I get anxious for you. Exactly.
Yeah. So, were there movies that almost made your list?
Yeah, there are a couple in here. Two other actually Darren Aronofsky movies, Pie and Black Swan. So he maybe is my director who taps into my anxieties. Also, Run Lola Run, Touching the Void, and The Revenant. What about yourself?
So I had some stone cold masterpieces: Chinatown,
Oh, damn.
Taxi Driver,
Ooh.
Master,
Oh, man.
Network,
Oh, yeah, all the
Talented Mr.
masterpieces.
Ripley, Sicario, Gone Girl, some new ones. But
Mhm.
it's sort of, I think I was hinting at this maybe in our last episode, that so many auteurs, their best works are around anxiety because they are tortured geniuses themselves or
Right.
perceive them to be. So
Uh-huh.
it's no surprise that, I mean, I feel like pretty much all of Scorsese's movies are, dancing on anxiety. You can classify Goodfellas as a very anxiety-driving movie as well.
Yeah, totally. That end sequence, especially when the helicopters
Yeah.
chasing him and stuff. I say that way about
Mhm.
Hitchcock too. Maybe that's why he loves
Yeah.
the tension of the thriller, because he has that anxious personality too. That's an interesting insight. What are we talking about next week? Which actor, director are we covering? And then in our next full episode, what are we doing, Karan? Why don't you tell our listeners?
Yeah. So we are covering unknown upcoming actor called Leonardo DiCaprio. Heard of him?
I haven't, but I'm glad we're giving a new artist a platform on this show, so that's good.
And this is where they make it big,
That's
obviously,
that's right. Yeah,
on
once we
this
cover them,
podcast.
this guy's gonna have a big career, I think. So
Totally. Yeah. But we thought that with Killers of the Flower Moon coming out, this might be a good time to kind of get into Leo's career, an actor who's obviously synonymous to our growing up from the 90s and such, as an actor who's lived with us. Kind of, we've grown old with him. So excited for that. And then after that, we kind of do this episode. We've done it the last, 2 years since we've been doing the podcast, which is about talking about the movies that shaped our love of film, essentially films that have pushed our knowledge of film, our love of film. So yeah, that's the next episode.
yeah, those are really fun. I'm looking forward to continuing to know more about your journey in terms of your love of film and cover those films. It'll be really exciting. Well, we hope this discussion today was not too anxiety inducing and you got through it and you found some movies maybe you haven't seen. And if you're willing to stomach them, you should check them out. Please also make sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice. Also, leave a rating and review. That definitely helps us be found in the algorithm. Also, make sure to check out our YouTube channel where you can see individual movie reviews of all the movies we've covered. And with that, we will see you next week.
Were you rushing or dragging?